Sweet Precure is fine. It's fine. Just fine. The hardest shit in the world to write about is stuff that's just fine. When some piece of media is great, it naturally offers plenty of material that lends itself to discussions of themes and technical mastery and all that jazz. Truly great works are often only the starting point for one's experience of that work. The bulk of one's experience of said work will be after-the-fact discussions of the work, consuming analyses of the work, and using the work as inspiration for your own creative endeavors. Similarly, works that are noticeably awful also easily lend themselves to many discussions. Perhaps the work endorsed or was in service of a deplorable political ideology, or maybe it was such a failure on a technical level that one can't help but wonder how something like this even got made in the first place. In general, good and bad media both provide easy starting points from which more in-depth conversations can be had. Why was thing good? Why was thing bad? But when something's just fine, like today's season of Precure, sweet, you can't get that easy starting point. You can't ask why it was good or bad and go from there, because it was neither of those things. It was neither so amazingly executed that I could spend pages analyzing the symbolism of a set piece or the blocking of a scene, nor was anything so incompetently executed that I could talk all day about how one scene makes no sense or how one element thematically conflicts with another. No, everything's just fine. It's fine. The show does its job. It's entertaining enough, but it's just lacking enough in the substance department that I'm going to have to dig really goddamn deep if I want to convey any worthwhile observations. So let's start digging, shall we? I suppose it would be fair to say that this show's themes and ideas are more clear than usual, and by clear I mean blunt, but whatever. Music! That's what this season's built around, not to the extent that it was a musical or anything, though now that I've said that I want to see what that would have looked like. What I mean is, the show is themed around music in that music is everywhere. Literally everywhere. But let's back up a sec and take a look at past thematic backgrounds in Precure. Yes 5 was basically a coming-of-age thing for each of its main characters, with a special focus on careers and passions. Each character spent the season learning more about themselves and came out of it knowing their desires and finding a career path they wanted to pursue. Simply put, in Yes 5, the theme of growing up drove each character's individual narrative. Fresh had a more visual thematic through line throughout its run. Dancing. To be honest, I hesitate to call it a theme, but it's a visual motif that recurs often enough with enough narrative weight that it qualifies, I think. Don't quote me. Dancing, in Fresh, served numerous functions. It served as a bonding activity between the main characters. It was a very physical activity, so as the girls practiced and got better, so too did they get better at the magical fighting stuff. Their very physical weekly brawls were themselves their own sort of dance. Most of all, though, it was a convenient excuse to introduce the CG dance sequences during the end credits, and those never went away. While dancing wasn't as large a narrative driving force, it recurred often enough to be ever-present in the viewer's mind, and could serve numerous functions as needed. So what does Sweet do with its music? Like Fresh, music is very multi-purpose, but like Yes 5, it's also an important narrative driver. Music is woven into the show's aesthetic as well as its narrative. Like, the whole town is themed around music. There's music festivals, and most of the local celebrities are musicians, and there's a bunch of music-themed decorations all over the place, most notably the piano key walkway, which somehow makes actual piano sounds? 1, 2, 3! These constant visual reminders mean music is a constant presence throughout the season, but it's also woven into the narrative. One of the long-running story threads is this old guy repairing his organ, which culminates in the surrounding area turning into a spaceship? Okay. Another arc is Hibiki and Kanade, the main characters, practicing a piano performance together. In that case, the music is the catalyst for their personal drama and the growth that results. In both real life and this season, music is often, if not usually, a tool through which emotion is expressed. More than that, though, in this season, music as a concept comes to be representative of human emotion. The big bad's whole deal is that he wants to get rid of human emotion via getting rid of music, because it's all just noise, and because the only emotion he's ever known is sadness. But music is so much more than that. It's happiness and sadness and everything in between. It's only through embracing that music that our heroes can succeed. Music is almost as integral to our lives as the emotions it represents, and by not pushing them away but embracing them, we can live better, more fulfilled lives. Okay, that probably sounded like a bunch of lofty nonsense, so let's do a little pivot and focus on the main characters for a bit now. Much of the first half of this season is characterized by the two main characters, Hibiki Hojo and Kanade Minamino, getting into fights with each other. And I don't mean the cool, magical fisticuffs variety, I mean verbal spats. It's difficult to articulate just how irritating these two were for the first part of the show. It was like putting gunpowder and a lit match into the same daycare and telling them to play nice. On paper, it makes for a cool spectacle, but then there's this whole mess that needs cleaning up and everything's on fire, and I have no idea what I'm doing with this metaphor. Point is, while having the leads fight all the time is conceptually interesting, after all, it's an unexpected direction for a show about friendship to take, and is not at all lacking in potential, it's brought down tremendously in execution. These fights are all frustrating and irritating to watch because they all boil down to simple misunderstandings and poor communication. Like, it would be fine if their fights were actually, you know, about something. Like if they had an initial disagreement about how they should fight the enemies, and when it inevitably escalated, it would reveal a fundamental difference in their philosophies of and approaches to heroism, with each perspective having strengths and drawbacks, and really having to sit down and reconcile or at least understand those differences. But no, instead it's all just, oh, we said we'd meet at a tree, and I waited at that tree forever, and you never showed up, but it turns out you were just waiting at a different tree that matches my tree's exact description, and this one event ruined our friendship for years just because we didn't communicate well and didn't bother to try to talk to each other about it afterward. Sadly enough, the fact that Hibiki and Kanade fought often was the most interesting part of them, because aside from that, I think these two, I mean, they have their quirks, but aside from that, I found them to be the least engaging Precure protagonists we've had so far. I could list off a bunch of factoids about these two, but I could list off very few things that would be deeply informative about the characters. What I mean is they have a lot of traits, characteristics that aren't fleshed out or greatly inform their characters. Take Hibiki. She's good at sports. Which sports? All the sports. Does that matter? I don't want to sound like I'm making a big deal out of nothing here, but this is literally how Hibiki is introduced, as the sports girl. From her first moment, her defining attribute is that she's good at sports ball. This fact is repeated a few times throughout the season, but aside from isolated repetitions of the fact, this facet of her character never seems to matter. Being good at sports is never shown to make her a better magical fighter, for instance. She never really talks about it with anyone. No one ever really asks how she's doing with all her sports. Her sporting never plays an important role in any plot or character beat. Basically, this facet of her character is never developed beyond its introduction, which is very odd considering how emphasized it was in that introduction. At some points, it seems like this season forgets about it, considering how much time Hibiki spends practicing piano with Kanade, only for it to be brought up again a few episodes later, like, yeah, she's still doing this. You would think there would be at least some mention of how her frequent sporting activities get in the way of doing other things, but no, she's always got time on her hands to do whatever the plot demands. I went off on a tangent there, didn't I? Look, I'm not trying to be a nitpicky asshole here. What I'm trying to say is, despite sporting seeming like it should be important, it actually isn't, and that matters because it's illustrative of how she's written as a whole, and Kanade for that matter. We know things about Hibiki and Kanade, which itself is fine, but we're rarely offered a deeper look into these two characters beyond those things. And I'm not saying there's no depth to these characters, period. After starring in 48 episodes of TVs, the writers would have had to have been major hacks to have not imbued them with something worth examining. For instance, Kanade is introduced as the baker, and her baking is later the catalyst for some friendship drama between her and Hibiki. All I'm saying here is that in comparison to previous seasons, there's a lack of nuance here. Main duo aside, let's talk about Ellen. Siren, whatever. Precure has often made use of the bad guy turn good trope ever since the first season. Splash Star and Fresh both had baddies switching sides and becoming friends with the main characters. Sweet does that too, sort of. So you've got Siren here, and she's an evil cat doing the bad things with the bad guy team. But it turns out that she was childhood friends of this season's fairy companion cat thing. Ooh, how different. So then, Hummy there friendships really hard at her, and she, of course, eventually switches sides. But, and this is the important bit, it turns out that this whole time, she wasn't actually evil. She was just brainwashed. And actually, so are the rest of the villains, sans the big bad... Okay, so setting aside the rest of the bad guy crew, this is just... If you ever wanted to sap any semblance of intrigue out of your villain, this is how you do it. Like, okay, what do you even do with that? The most you could wrangle out of a character like that post-brainwashing is wallowing in guilt, and indeed that does occur, but... After that, how do you develop a character whose defining characteristic is she was brainwashed? According to Sweet Precure, she spends a couple of episodes getting over it, and that's it. That's it. There's nothing else. She's forever static. Okay, let me back up a bit. So, why is it bad for a character's defining attribute to be they were brainwashed? Well, it removes any agency from that character, which on its own isn't necessarily a bad thing, but in the context of an arc about personal redemption, removing the character's agency during the parts they're supposed to be redeeming themselves from cheapens the whole thing. By saying, oh, they weren't really bad, they were just brainwashed, it absolves the character of any real responsibility for their evil actions while they were brainwashed. They're not really guilty, you see. They just feel like they are. They can get over it. To contrast this with a good example of this trope, all we have to do is look back a couple of seasons at Fresh Precure. Setsuna is that season's baddie turned goodie, and as much as I feel like her development over the first half could have been clarified, she, at least, is always an active agent. She fought for the bad guy team not because she was physically brainwashed, though I suppose growing up in an oppressive system like she did could be considered its own form of brainwashing. Anyway, rather, initially, she chose to fight for them. She didn't switch to the good guy team because someone snapped her out of it. She had the chance to observe for herself that the good guys were indeed good, and that her team was in fact doing the bad. When she finally became a cure and spent not just a couple of episodes, but most of the rest of the season feeling guilt, she had genuine reason to, because she committed evil deeds of her own volition. She was responsible, and she had to come to terms with her misdeeds before she could learn from them and grow into a better person. Ellen, though? Nah, she's cool. Don't take any of this to mean I don't like Ellen. She does have plenty of genuinely funny fish-out-of-water moments, and her cure design is the best of the season. Her couple of episodes where she's feeling guilty do make for the best drama in the whole show, not to mention some genuinely good directing and the single best shot of the whole season, though really those couple of episodes should have been one. All I'm saying is, by removing Ellen's agency and responsibility for her actions, the season, by proxy, removed from her a good deal of nuance. Her guilt does not feel wholly justified, and I can't fully buy into her. And then, the season went and committed a crime, and that crime's name is Cure Muse. Well, okay, maybe I shouldn't say crime. This season betrayed my expectations, set me up for disappointment. Cure Muse is set up as the most intriguing character of the lot, only to be eventually revealed as the most boringest one, which saddens me deeply. Let's get into the particulars. Cure Muse is introduced as a rogue cure, whose identity is unknown. Though she occasionally helps out the main cast, she's an independent entity, with her own motivations and desires that the viewers are not privy to. In a word, she's mysterious, and all of this is completely new to Precure. Well, one could argue that Heartcatch did kind of a similar thing with Cure Moonlight, But the difference here is that Moonlight's presence was minimal in the first half of Heartcatch, sort of just a mysterious figure who we know was there, whereas Muse shows up quite often. She reappears frequently so that you never have a chance to stop wondering what her deal is. Conceptually, I'm all for this. A rogue cure who's just like the main characters but is fighting neither for or against them. Sometimes she'll help them, sometimes hinder. What reason could a cure possibly have for doing something like that? That mystery's a good enough setup, and with some good payoff, Cure Muse could have literally been the best. Not to mention her initial outfit is smashing. Wholly unlike any previous Cure outfit in terms of design and color choice, made to be dark and accentuate the character's mysterious, as opposed to being cute and colorful. Alas, we can't have nice things. After the reveal that the bad guy of the first half of the season is her dad— wait a minute, shit. Just as I'm writing this, I'm realizing that the same thing happened with Cure Moonlight. This one really is just a retread. Damn. Anyway, the initial reveal that the bad guy is Muse's dad is I guess I didn't see it coming, so props there. It's the follow-up that really stumbles. Of course, Cure Muse's dad can't be just a straight-up bad guy. No, he's brainwashed too. He's actually a good guy. Blech. Like with Ellen, this robs the bad guy of any agency, but let's focus on Muse here. The brainwashing thing also robs her of some intrigue. Theoretically, a cure having a loved one on the bad guy team is really interesting. Having to stand up to someone you love in order to do what's right is not exactly a cakewalk, and it would have been a great life skill for kids to learn. Narratively, if that dynamic lasted, you can milk from it a lot of dramatic inner turmoil, constantly having to balance the right thing to do versus the well-being of the loved one, constantly getting into both verbal and physical fights with each side trying to convert the other. The new She-Ra does this to a certain extent, with the main character and her best friend finding each other on opposing sides of a war, each fiercely loyal to and believing in their own side, and their struggle, their desire for each other's friendship versus their beliefs is by far the most interesting part of that show, but in Sweets? Nah! Almost as soon as the familial connection is made, the brainwashing is undone, and everyone's fine now. They're good. Problems solved. Drama emerging from two people who are close but have opposing ideologies? Ew, that sounds too complicated. Here, they're already back together. Everyone's happy now. Isn't that lovely? No. No, it is not. Mostly, though, I'm just mad about the outfit change. Like, really, look at this. Going from cool and unique to bleh. Sure, she looks more in line with the rest of them now, but her uniqueness was part of her appeal. Look, I get it. Having this visual consistency between the designs of the Cures helps sell the idea that they're all one unit, a team, and that's fine, but it came at the cost of the best costume design this season, save for Ellen's, so I reserve my right to be mad. Let's address the main villain, Noise. We're glossing over the rest of the villains because just like Ellen, they all suffer from the brainwashing dilemma. What we're left with then is the only interesting villain being the big bad, Noise.
I summon Red Eyes Black Dragon!
Writing this just now, I realize how the villain's name is sort of the antithesis of this season's thematic focus on music. Like, to call a piece of music just a bunch of noise is the ultimate insult, right? You disregard any artistic or melodic merit it may have, writing it off as meaningless. Noise, the villain, wants to get rid of all music because it's just noise to his ears. So his name is really fitting, especially for a random English name in a Japanese production. Is that intentional? I don't know. I don't care. It's cool. Anyway, this season's villain is presented as Sorrow Incarnate. He literally spawned from the cumulative sadness of every human heart. In a sense, defeating this guy was an impossible task from the outset, because since he spawned from human emotions, he'll exist so long as humans do. So instead of beating the crap out of him, the Cures do the smart thing and embrace him. They won the day not by fighting what they hated, but by saving what they loved. They recognized that they could never be rid of sadness because it's an integral part of their being, but that's okay. Because as long as there's sadness, there must also be happiness, and happiness is worth living for. So they embrace it, and by doing so, they send the message that we should too. Embrace our sadness because it's a part of us, and if we can learn to live with it, then we'll be all the better for it. Also a sign of the girls' maturity that they managed to figure all this out long before the adults around them ever could.
Precure は私たちの想像以上の成長を遂げたようですね。
We are what they grow beyond. That is the true burden of all masters.
Overall, I think it's fair to say that this season is a step down in terms of visuals from the last season. Applied to any other season, that statement would imply much worse, but given that we're following from the spectacular Heartcatch here, it was almost to be expected. Heartcatch was such a departure from the rest of the series visually that keeping up that new aesthetic, or making up a new one, would have been wholly impractical. After all, we still do have these crossover movies to do, and we can't do those if we have to keep redesigning the characters just for them, now can we? But aside from this season obviously not being Heartcatch and looking like any other season of Precure, I wouldn't even say that this is the most visually engaging season of Precure that isn't Heartcatch. Fresh Precure 2 years prior, despite bearing more in common with Sweet visually than either do with Heartcatch, had a bit more flair to it. Sweet, following in Heartcatch's footsteps, had a higher frequency of wacky facial expressions and otherwise expressive characters, at least higher than Fresh, but nothing quite as memorable. When Fresh went all out in its character animation, it ended up being a showcase of some of the best character animation in the series. Heartcatch dropped moments of expressive animation every which way, but Sweet, it's fine. Just fine. Same goes for the fight animation, it's fine, but nothing as impressive as occurred in either of the previous 2 seasons. Actually, I guess that does make this season noticeable in one aspect, breaking the trend of increasingly awesome fight animation. Up until now, each new season of Precure showcased dope-ass fight animation that got better as the seasons went on. But then Sweet happened, and suddenly nothing happened that was nearly as impressive as stuff even 3 seasons ago. It's got some good stuff in there occasionally, but overall it's just, it's meh. It's fine. It's passable. What else do you want from me?
And now for something completely different.
Is it okay for any work of fiction to appropriate pieces of past works without considering the context of what they're pulling? Consider, for example, if you were writing a story and you named a character Sherlock. In this day and age, anyone would inevitably think of Sherlock Holmes, a character who is so ubiquitous throughout our collective pop cultural consciousness that either of his names will inevitably bring to mind images or ideas associated with that character, be it the hat or the being smart or what have you. If you named a character of your own Sherlock, it would be wholly irresponsible to ignore everything associated with that name and character, because every time your reader or viewer saw or heard the name Sherlock, they would have little choice but to think of Mr. Holmes. When you name your character Sherlock, you bring with that name all sorts of expectations. Your character may be smart, and if they're not, why are they named Sherlock? For that matter, why are they named Sherlock? No matter what, in your story, you have to address the baggage that comes with the name you picked, else your audience will never get past that baggage, and they'll be left stuck thinking of a different character. I don't care how you address this baggage, or what you do with your character, so long as you make it clear you're aware of the history associated with the name you picked, and that you have some reason for picking that name. With all that said, this season's magic land where stuff happens that causes the Precure thing is ruled by a monarch named Aphrodite. You know, Greek goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, aka sexuality and lust. Among her roles, she was the patron goddess of prostitutes. Did you know that Aphrodite frequently cheated on her husband Hephaestus? And in the show, some of her drama is about family trouble. Did you know that Aphrodite caused the Trojan War when she bewitched Helen into abandoning her husband to go be with Paris and Troy? So Helen's husband got mad about that and kickstarted the whole bloody affair. Look, I'm not saying you can't take historical figures and reinvent them to suit your narrative. You can totally do that, if you're a hack. When you appropriate the name of a character with that much history and then ignore all of it, whenever that character appears on screen, viewers like me won't be able to focus on them. They'll be distracted with thoughts like, wait a minute, wasn't she the mother of Aeneas, protagonist of one of the world's oldest and greatest fanfictions? And obviously I'm glossing over a lot of Aphrodite's legend to make my point here, because there's probably some really generic kid-friendly-ish stuff to pull from. But I think it's still important to at least acknowledge the context of a name, even if that context doesn't wholly inform that name's new usage. There's a good example of this in, funnily enough, the most recent season of the best modern Sherlock Holmes TV adaptation, Elementary. A bit character in this season introduces himself and, well, just watch.
Detective Marcus Bell, Deputy Strider Lincoln, U.S. Marshal Service.
Strider? Like
Lord of the Rings?
My parents are nerds.
See, this is an example of this sort of thing done right, because the context behind the name is acknowledged within the dialogue. This character isn't anyone important, but by giving him a unique name, a reason for having it, and acknowledging the context of the name, the show has given us insight into this character who otherwise would have been completely forgettable. The show used the name to give depth to a bit character who otherwise would have had none, and that's cool.
And now for something.
One thing that bears mention, surprisingly, is this season's filler movie, and it's worth mentioning because it tries really hard not to be filler. This season's filler movie aired between episodes 36 and 37, and its plot follows directly from 36. Of course, this movie still has the trappings of a filler movie, namely one-off characters and villains that don't matter to the rest of the story, but still, it's notable that it at least tried to be relevant. A shame, then, that the series not only ignored it, but outright contradicted it. After the whole reveal about Akko being from Magic Place and Evil Dad not being evil, the whole deal with the movie is Akko figuring out what she wants to do now, and she ultimately decides to stay with the other Cures to help them do the magic fight thing. She makes this explicitly clear to her parents, and they're like, okay, cool. But then episode 37 happens, and it had kind of the same thing happen, sort of. Not Evil Dad and Akko have a substantial talk about her staying, with both seemingly forgetting that she'd already made the decision and had good reason for it, and the parents signed off on it. So it kind of strikes the whole movie from the canon? Look, I get why this was done. The show, first and foremost, needs to make sense on its own on an episode-by-episode basis. It couldn't expect all of its audience to go see a movie at a very particular point in the story, especially not in the future when you have to Google this shit instead of watching the latest episode and then going to the movie theater a few days later. I just think this could have been handled a bit more smartly. It's fine to let the movie handle some plot-relevant character drama. All you would have to do is, in the next episode, briefly recap whatever developments occurred, or at the very least, not go out of your way to contradict them. Alternatively, you could just have the movies not be plot relevant, let them be their own thing. That's worked out well enough up until now. I could live with that. With that tangent over, though, I think it's time to wrap this thing up. Like I said in the beginning, Sweet Precure is simply okay. Its characters are fine. They've got some cool characteristics and some irritating habits, which balance out, I guess. The overall narrative structure isn't as tight as the previous season, but when the pace picks up, it's compelling enough. The visuals aren't as noteworthy, but they do their job. The season's fine. It's competent. I enjoyed it well enough, but unlike Heartcatch, I can't see myself revisiting this season anytime soon. Thanks for sitting through my ramblings about a children's magical cartoon show. I'm aware this one was a bit weirder in content, probably, but that's what happens when I rush to finish a mostly done script because I've had the brilliant idea of one video a week and I only have a week left to edit this video. Oh god, I still have to do that. Oh yeah, this is the third in a month of weekly uploads, so check the others out. Leave your thoughts in the comments, as you no doubt have many. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next week. Also, I have no idea when the next Precure video will come out, so just, whatever. Okay, bye!